My name is Gareth Davies. I'm Principal Flute Player in the London Symphony Orchestra, and I'm very, very pleased today to welcome a great friend of the orchestra, Tilson Thomas. Now, Michael, I sometimes wonder when I look at your website how you manage to fit the LSO in, because you seem to be a man who's incredibly busy, not only conducting and travelling, but actually coming up with concepts for programs, because the program that you brought, or the couple of programs you brought for us to perform, are very different and very quite idiosyncratic, I think. But there's a sort of a theme. I mean, the thing that's coming out for me in the rehearsals over the last few days has been the sheer amount of colour in the programs that we've been doing. What was the thinking behind all the Debussy and Berlioz?
You know, I get asked that question a lot about how did you come up with one program or another, and there's really no mystery to it. It's really like, how do you decide what you're going to have for dinner? You know, if you have guests coming for dinner, what do you think about? You think, well, okay, what did I give them the last time? Or what's my most reliable special dish? Or what's in season now? Or you know, some idea of what would be both a tasteful experience, which could apply to both events, but also a kind of pleasurable one that encourages a kind of interaction between people. And if the interaction between people on the stage is good, then it has a very good chance of being so also with those in the audience for whom it, after all, is being done.
So the Debussy pieces, we're playing some of the preludes today,
Yes.
And then La Mer in the concert next week, or in Spain. If anybody's watching in Spain, we might be seeing you later next week. The way they've been orchestrated by Colin Matthews is very interesting, because if any of the audience know the pieces as piano pieces, there's an element of the orchestration that it's not actually always easy to tell that they are originally piano pieces. They sound like Debussy.
Yes, definitely.
I think. Was it a choice of yours to particularly use these pieces, even though I mean, obviously there's plenty of Debussy that has been orchestrated by himself. Was it a choice? Is that something that you've always played as a pianist, that you've always wanted to bring that pianistic thing to the orchestra?
Yes, I did play Debussy's music a lot, and still do play it on the piano, and it is a glorious experience to play on the piano, because Debussy was so aware of the possibility of these kind of great vistas of sound that can come out of the piano using the pedal, particularly the artful way in which he did, and using extreme contrasts of sonorities between high and low sounds in the piano. And it's really the whole world of Liszt and Chopin and all that, but just taken to a much further degree. And there's a whole kind of physical element that's enormously fun, because playing a piece by Debussy has a certain similarity to kind of swimming in a marathon race or some sort of another. There's a lot of this going on, a lot of crossing of arms and reaching over and flailing around, hopefully in the neighborhood of the right notes. And that big gestural sense is so interesting, the way Debussy translated it to the orchestra. And as Gareth mentioned, he was a wonderful orchestrator, but he hated to orchestrate. It was very laborious, of course, and he much preferred to explore new territory in the actual notes and the gestures of the music, which was where he thought his biggest original contribution was. So there are a lot of great pieces that were never taken into orchestral form. It was a kind of bonus to discover that Colin Matthews had used his enormous virtuosity as a writer, as a composer, to bring these preludes, which they are the ones we are doing are very well-known pieces, but they do have a real presence in his orchestration, particularly because he's mastered that sound of the pedal being down on the piano and things sort of reverberating around, which is no easy thing to do in an orchestra.
You can really hear the blur of the sound.
Yes, that's really masterful and special. And also we're doing a piece of orchestration by Robin Holloway of a piece called En Blanc et Noir, and that's a piece for two pianos. And some of you may know that. Many people do not know it so well. It's a very late piece. Debussy wrote this already during the time of the Second World War, and it is much like the music of his later Images and Etudes, more abstract music. Yet the second movement is a most unusual little tone poem, almost like the music to accompany a short film about the life of soldiers in the trenches during the Great War. And it's very touching, most affecting music.
Well, speaking of master orchestrators, of course, tonight we're playing Symphonie Fantastique Berlioz. Now there's some serious orchestration going on there. It's that's a piece which we've done quite a lot, of course, but every time we played it with different conductors, there's always it's incredible how different it can sound. Do you is that something which draws you to making music? Because a lot of people will look at a score and think that's how it goes. But it's incredible. I'm sure the members of the audience will hear the difference between when you perform it this evening with us and, for instance, Colin Davies. It's a completely different interpretation. Is that something which you actively try and do? When you study a score, you've, I imagine, conducted Symphonie Fantastique a few times.
That's a very disarming question. I'll try and give you an honest answer to it. I think, when you're a young musician, of course, you're swept away by the beautiful music that is in the repertoire. You wouldn't be doing it unless you had that really emotional, visceral connection about the music. Something in the music has reached out and sort of claimed you, in a way, as part of your experience of it. And then when you start trying to do it yourself, of course, you have in your ears the sounds of lots of performances that you've heard. So you may try at first to do something like what it is you know. It's kind of hard not to. And then it's possible, I know in my case that certainly happened, that I went through a period of deliberately doing something that was not what I had heard. And this was climaxed by a kind of legendary, slightly scandalous perhaps, performance of the Eroica that I did with the Boston Symphony at Tanglewood, which got a big headline that said anti-Eroica or something like that. And then I think that having taken that position, that then I was free to just relax and let myself be at ease with the music again and just see what things about it I found the most touching and remarkable to me, which is sounds simple, but it's actually, it requires a certain degree of courage and commitment to do that. And indeed, when I work with young musicians, I kind of ask them I guess there are 4 questions I always ask young musicians when they bring a new piece. And the first question is, what is happening? So in this whole piece, the phrase structure, the melody, the harmony, this, that, it's a lot of things. What is happening? And then the next question, why is it happening? To what purpose is it happening? And then the third question, which I find so often they have never been asked, and what does all of this mean to you in particular? And then the fourth question, what are you going to do about it? And so I think that's a stage that one goes through almost with each new piece that comes along.
And have you found that when you were a young conducting student, have you found that as your career has progressed, that your way of looking at pieces and perhaps rehearsing the orchestra even has changed? Because it feels different for me, personally speaking, working with you now to when I did nearly 20 years ago, actually. Yep. Do you find that you're more relaxed because you've lived with those pieces for a long time, or Do you trust the orchestra more now?
I think way more. I mean, I can hear in the rehearsal of the repertoire, like the Berlioz, I can instantly feel the familiarity and inner vision that the orchestra has of the piece. And then it's more like a chamber music experience of just saying, okay, well, there are a few little turns of phrase here and there that could be done one way or the other. And it's actually, in a way, more fun rather than trying to go through and define every single bar, of just taking it in larger groups. And it's amazing what you can accomplish. I mean, I experienced something like this once. As a young conductor, as rehearsal pianist, I was supposed to accompany Rudolf Serkin, of all things, in performances, rehearsals of the Beethoven Piano Concerti, which he was doing with Wilhelm Steinberg. And so I had practiced all these accompaniments. Well, when the two of them got together, they said, oh, well, we're certainly not going to go through all of these pieces, so let's just discuss the pieces. So they opened the first concerto, and Steinberg kind of went through, turning pages, and he said, now, what about here? Yes or no? And Serkin said, yes. He said, fine, yes. Now, what about over here? I say no. They said, Serkin's fine. No, what about here? A little bit. All right, a little bit. And they kind of spent perhaps 5 minutes on each one of those concerti, and then,
Yeah.
they're off with it.
So almost that now working, even though the orchestra for the Berlioz is massive, it still feels almost like the chamber music, like you are playing chamber music next week, I think, with a group of players. Is it has your approach to the two become more similar? Because many people often talk about chamber music is over here, solo over here, and playing in an orchestra is sort of over there somewhere.
It is my big mission in life to convince all musicians, and very much young musicians, that they must not check their identities as soloists and chamber musicians at the door when they come in to play in a symphony orchestra. That they must fiercely hold on to those things, even though it is, of course, much more difficult to achieve those sort of values with as many people as are in an orchestra. But that's really what makes it fun, and I think it's the most inspiring thing for the public, rather than having a maestro who's flailing around and people are sort of following or not. When you sense that everyone in the orchestra really understands the music and is in on all of the inside story of the piece, and all these very elegant things are clearly seen in the listening and in the reactions to one another that's going on in the orchestra. I take the greatest of pleasure in that, both as a listener and as a performer. That's what I try and encourage.
And that comes across to the audience. I think that's the important thing. Now, you've mentioned working with young people. I know that's something which you have always done a lot of. I remember being next door at the Guildhall a very long time, sometime last century, in fact, and coming to your concerts with the LSO, some on Janacek, where you spoke about the piece, and I always got a huge amount from them, because it was interesting hearing you talking passionately about something and then hearing the piece afterwards and thinking, oh, right, that's what he was on about. And another experience we were just talking about just before we came on, your New World Symphony, which I had the pleasure of playing piccolo very loudly in the Charles Ives Symphony a very long time ago. It's obviously great for the young people to be able to do the New World Symphony, which you might need to explain to a few people, but is it a two-way thing? Do you come away from that feeling sort of there's hope for the future and energized by that experience?
Yes. The New World Symphony is an academy of young musicians that has existed for 25 years. We reside in Florida, in Miami Beach, actually, in the heart of a section called South Beach, and we most recently moved into a remarkable facility designed by Frank Gehry for the Academy, which is it's really kind of technological center. It has rehearsal halls and performing venues, but it also is very, very much wired to make use of Skype and internet too, and various kinds of video conferencing things. And as we've been doing this for many years, but now it's kind of on a regular basis, as I'm walking through the practice room section, I'm looking through a window and I can see that there's someone who's having a lesson with someone wherever. They're in the students are in Miami and the teacher is in Paris or Berlin or New York or wherever they are. That's just part of the way the community is expanding. And so it's exciting to work in an environment like that, particularly because the young people have ideas about how to use all of this much in advance of mine, because they've grown up with it from the first moments. And this idea, which the LSO exemplifies in so many ways, about bringing music to people, young people, and audience development of all kinds, is a mission that I think all musicians have to take up. And if young musicians become more comfortable with using the means that are now at their disposal, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. We've had a question from Facebook from a small orchestra called Harmony Symphonia, getting a little bit of free advertising there. They would like to know how you'd advise a small orchestra like them to pursue new ways of presenting and exciting people about classical music.
Well, my heritage is musical, because all of my parents and grandparents and so on played music a lot and actually wrote songs and things like this. Music was a very big part of their life, and they appreciated classical music. But they were not trained musicians. They were instinctive musicians who mostly worked in the theater. And so my attitudes, perhaps, growing up in that environment with respect to the audience, I was kind of raised to be very aware of who the audience is, what the audience is, who they are, and to really appreciate them and understand where they are now, what their experience is, what they understand, what they like, and to provide that for them, and also have a vision of where you would like them to be in some years down the road, and create a program which kind of has, perhaps on each program that you give, ideally there are 3 pieces, and one of them is diverting, and one of them is challenging, and one of them is reaffirming, and that it reaffirms for those who are listening what it was about this musical experience that first attracted them and that continues to make them want to be a part of it.
So do you think that, you've mentioned modern technology, do you think that's going to become more important to what we do? Because essentially, it's a lot of people sitting on stage performing music as well as all the other things. Do you think we'll ever get to the stage where the communal experience of coming to a concert will be lessened because of things like the digital concert hall in Berlin and to some extent the YouTube Symphony project that you've worked on? Do you think that's something that we'll see one day, that people won't necessarily be leaving their homes to come to things?
Well, I hope not, and I actually am not too worried about that, because we humans enjoy congregating for all sorts of purposes. People, of course, hold experience of going to church, and in modern, more secular terms, the experience of going to the theater or going to concerts, or where I really think it has become is going to museums. In a way, I think museums have become the new cathedrals, and these enormous crowds of people who are in museums venerating these art objects, the larger the better, it seems. And that experience is vital. I think that will always remain. And of course, the live experience is wonderful because there is a danger about it, as you well know,
Yes.
which can be exciting. And the thing that's great, I think, about the internet potentially is that sort of social network of things. It allows the audience to know the members of the orchestra better, to understand who they are and what their process is, how much they do in order to make wonderful music for them. So in this way, this is a bit more like sport. And there is such a difference between those things. I asked a well-known music journalist once in the United States, I said, I'm going to tell you 5 names. And I told him these 5 names and said, do you know who these people are? He had no idea who they were. I said, well, those are the names of the solo E-flat clarinet players in the New York Philharmonic, so on, major American orchestras. I said, now, isn't it interesting, if you were a sports writer, and I said, who is the defensive end, or the this, or the that, or the shortstop, or whatever the positions of these different games are in these different major teams, you'd be able to tell me exactly who their names were, and if they had been injured last year, and where they had been trained before that, and for whom they had substituted, and the whole deal. You would know all of that. So what is that about the way our culture in music has developed, that we don't also have that? And we have to change that.
Well, that's certainly something we've been doing. You know, we have the website, the Facebook page, which people are watching now, blogs, Twitter, and all of those things seem to actually break down the barriers. It's nice when we occasionally get kids texting in saying, we're playing the Planets next week at our school concert. Right. And, you know, it's great to be able to say, oh, well, good luck. And they say, oh, I've got a good luck from the LSO. Wow, that's great.
Absolutely.
And I think that's quite important. I mean, it's something which you've always done, and that's to sort of blow the dust off it's lots of old men in silly suits playing music for old people, that actually this is something which is vibrant and live. The YouTube Symphony that we've just mentioned, Kelvin Giles on Facebook wants to know, are you planning another one?
The idea is simmering, shall we put it that way. It's like, I think each time it's been done, we've tried to reimagine it and imagine expanding it. And my own interest these days in the possibilities of these things is really considering these 2 things. What is happening in, quote, real life, unquote, and what is happening in online life. And there are 2 different senses of time involved here, and trying to really get these things coordinated in such a way that one supports the other is not as easy as you think it might happen. It can happen sort of randomly very easily, but if you try to say, is there some possibility of sustaining relationships and communication and greater understanding through this by some more continuous process, that's more difficult to imagine, and that's what I'm looking at right now.
Cool. I think we should see if there's any questions from the hall. I have a beautiful assistant, Caro, down there with a microphone so that everybody can hear them. So if you have a question, if you could put your hand up, and Caro will make her way to you.
Hello. Over Christmas here, we had a concert on television from Carnegie Hall with our former leader, Sasha, and some very good soloists, Dawn Upshaw, and Michael Tilson Thomas, who sang.
Yes.
And this was the concert of Gershwin.
Oh, yes, yes.
And it went down a storm in our house. I wonder whether you could give the benefit of that to our Barbican audience here in 2 or 3 years' time when you come, whether you do it again.
With us.
That concert.
Would I ever do it again?
Would you do the Bernstein? It was Bernstein concert.
Oh, would I do that Bernstein concert?
Yes, in that same way. We had Yo-Yo Ma and yourself and so on with a wonderful.
Well, if you can corral all those people together, I mean, sure.
That's the tricky thing.
I mean, it was a lovely experience, and of course, it's always a pleasure to remember and honor Lenny. And there have been different experiences like that. One of the more interesting ones was the first one, which was done just after he had passed on, and that was an orchestra that was assembled in Carnegie Hall, which was members of the Boston Symphony, the New York Philharmonic, the Vienna Philharmonic, the Orchestra de Santa Cecilia, the Orchestra Nationale de France, the Israel Philharmonic, basically, all orchestras that he had worked with, the Concertgebouw orchestras he had worked with a lot. And they all got together, and the very first piece we were playing was one of his meditations from Mass. And it's a piece in which the strings, brass, percussion all play the first note, and it kind of goes, ba-dee-da-dee, and everyone has to attack very smartly this first note. And I gave the upbeat for this, and what we heard was this. Because, of course, all these different orchestras in the world play in a different place relative to where the beat is given. And it was the sort of thing that this kind of quintuplet that happened in these attacks, you could take years to rehearse that, and you never get it, but it just happens spontaneously.
There were probably lots of contemporary composers in the audience thinking, I'm going to use that. Okay, Caro, while you move to the next person, we'll take another question. Lee in Australia on Facebook wants to know, are you coming to Australia soon?
Well, I was just thinking about that. I had such a good time there. I just loved the audiences and the whole feeling. And it's amazing. I went to a rehearsal of the Sydney Symphony. We're doing Mahler's Seventh, and I was just knocked out by it. It sounded fabulous. So I'm aware of what great music is going on there, and I'd like to come back and be part of it.
There we go, Lee.
Hi, Michael. Just going back to your dinner party analogy. Now, all orchestras need to retain as well as to attract new audiences. How do you balance the need or the desire to experiment and perform perhaps less known, less popular pieces with the usuals, if you like, that would attract the crowd, because there's the financial side as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously the best way of doing that is by having a sustained relationship with an orchestra and an audience, because what you're developing over time is a sense of trust that the audience will see a name of an unfamiliar composer, but they're willing to trust you, that they know that you picked this piece because you really like it and you really think it's important that they hear it. So in San Francisco, for example, this has been developed over time. It was sort of a mission that I had when I got there, that in terms of contemporary music, the range of contemporary music would be understood more completely, that it would be more than just one particular musical doctrine that would be represented. So it really opened up, but the common thread that all the pieces that I chose or asked people to play was that really I loved those pieces, that I really thought they had something to say, something that was memorable, and that I've stayed away from pieces that were the sort of listen to this, it's bitter, but listen to it and you'll feel better in the morning sort of pieces. I wanted to do pieces that right now kind of grabbed you in some way or another.
There's lots of questions on the internet asking about tips for conducting, about how to become a conductor. I guess there are probably 1,001 answers in that. But one question that somebody's asked, which is interesting, is should you study an instrument as well?
Oh, very much so, of course. I mean, my instrument, major instrument, is piano, which is very useful because the piano it's kind of like the word processor of music in a way, that it allows you to deal with all of these constructs of chords and counterpoint and so on, and very useful in reading the score of what the instruments are playing. But I also had a period of my life where I studied oboe, which was very valuable, and it caused me as a pianist to deal with something I hadn't thought about before, which was just the quality of sustaining and spinning a single note. And it was a real challenge for me at first, just to kind of turn my energies to, it's just this one thing, but it's about that very particular, what the quality of the song, more like being a singer, for example. And that's been very valuable because, as Gareth mentioned, increasingly, I think my interest about the orchestra has become the textures, the colors, the possibilities of the shading of sound that can exist within the orchestra. And the more you know about the way the instruments work, the better. And I'm always learning things. Recently, I did the Ligeti Fiddle Concerto with Christian Tetzlaff, and there's a particular sound that he got in the cadenza in the last movement, which was basically a kind of sort of flageolet played on on the G string with anyway, the bow in a very particular position and angled in a very particular way. And it really is flautando. It really does sound like a flute. And that's so fascinated me, hearing it and how compelling it was, and then learning from him exactly how he was doing it. And now I'm trying to encourage maybe that to be done in an orchestra. Who knows? It might be possible to be used somewhere.
Interesting as well, when you have a conductor who has got experience of wind instruments, you can tell as a wind player, because there's something to do with breathing as well, which pianists don't always think about as much.
It's true. As you probably can see, I hope I'm not too noisy in doing it. I do breathe. And this was one of Piatigorsky's great lessons, the great cellist Piatigorsky, in whose class I was the accompanist for some years. And also, I have to say, Mr. Heifetz as well, that the big lesson was, if you're wondering where you should come in, breathe and then play.
Yeah.
And that's always what I try and do. I always actually this. And the thing is, there are a lot of different kinds of breaths. There's a, it's almost like the expression of the phrase is already determined by the breath.
It's like a dramatic soprano in an opera. Exactly. Do we have another question in the hall? You could just wait for the microphone. It's just coming.
I just want to say how much I enjoy your DVDs, The Keeping Score. And I think it's really, really nice for us, the public, to come before a concert or so. But how did you start it? Whose idea was it? And how did you get finance for that? Because maybe the LSO can do it also. I really enjoy those DVDs.
It was my idea, and it kind of came out of family concerts that I was doing in the hall, which became more and more elaborate over time. And then I was trying to reimagine that experience in terms of video and in terms of the internet, because, this is nice. There are very few of us here, and we're fairly close together, so our experience can be relaxed and intimate. And I'm speaking to you just as I would speak to you. If the hall were filled with people, I would have to adopt a different kind of tone and a different sort of mission in the vocabulary and the way the constructs were put forth, because it's being presented in such a way. But I was trying to imagine how to do this in a way that would be even closer than we are now. It would be more like you would be seated on the piano bench next to me, and I would have the score there. And I'd be saying, listen, watch, this is incredible. You see this over here? And that came about in this wonderful little place, Nussdorf, outside of Vienna. You should see the place. Just the way it was, bang, we're there. Through the magic of all this. We could just be there. And then we could be back again at the piano. So you see that chord I was telling you about, that's what was in my imagination. And as you correctly perceived, it was very complex and costly to do this, and we got many different foundations to do it. And it was a project that was conceived from the standpoint of being a broadcast television event, a DVD event, home sales event, a presence on the internet, and also as part of the curriculum of school systems as well. And the presence of it was different in each one of these areas. So for example, in one of the shows on Beethoven, I mentioned, answering the question that so often is asked, why are these symphonies so long? And so, well, in the first movement of the Eroica, Beethoven has these themes, but he takes these themes through these different keys, and the different keys have different meanings to him, different associations, A flat major, G flat major, B flat minor, and so on. And they're sort of different realms, and I gave an example of one key, A flat major, that this for Beethoven is kind of the key of reconciliation, of compassion, the way it's used in the Eroica, but indeed in other pieces of Beethoven in A flat major, which are in a very similar kind of tone. So I mentioned that in the air show. But on the website, you could go to a section which said Beethoven and keys, tonalities. And you could see a whole chart there of many, many different keys, and you could pick a particular key, and it would play to you the music in the Eroica, which is in that key, but it would also play for you a few other pieces of Beethoven's which are in that same key, so that you could then decide, do you really believe that they have a common character? And the thing that is fun about doing that, it is amazing to do that, and there is also tremendous challenge in it, because to do that one project is great, but then how to figure out how to sustain this? What about the Second Symphony? And what about the, this? And what about the whole picture, which comes back to the question we were discussing earlier. How can the internet be organized in such a way that it offers to the curious a rewarding and immediate way of interconnecting lots of ideas in the whole wonderful 1,200-year tradition of classical music?
It's very interesting. We've got time for a couple more questions. There's one on here from Jonas on Facebook about when you have to or find yourself conducting a piece which you really don't like very much.
That's never happened.
No, I thought you might say that. But let's say if it did. I mean, there are pieces which obviously you will love more than others. But when you have a new score and you don't know it, and it's a challenge, how do you start off? Do you sit down at the piano and score read it, or take it to the orchestra if it's an orchestral piece? How do you process something that's brand new compared to things you've lived with for years?
It depends entirely on how complex it is. I mean, if it is something, let's say, like a Haydn symphony, I have the ability to look at the score and I can hear what it sounds like. And then I can kind of play with solfegging certain phrases, and and I can also, of course, play it on the piano. If beyond a certain point, let's say a Strauss, new Strauss piece, I can hear a lot of it, but then I actually have to go to the piano and check the voicings of certain chords and play a bit of it at a time, sort of in layers, to get to understand how it all works. If it's something, let's say, like a piece by Luciano Berio, it's beyond my abilities to play all the notes, but I would look more at the patterns that I see in the music, and then having identified particular gestures in the music, maybe then I might solfege those or play some of those. So at least I have a certain idea of the signposts or the basic elements of the mix that the piece represents.
Right, oh, that's interesting. So we've got time for one more question in the audience. Is there one more? There we are, last question. Thank you, Caro.
Thank you. You touched briefly in your speech earlier about your parents, your grandparents, and the musical family that you came from. I was very privileged last year to be in Philadelphia when you presented a wonderful evening on Boris and Bessie Tomaszewski, your grandparents. I just wondered if there's any chance of you bringing this amazing evening here to London. There'd be a wonderful community and audience here who would love to hear about how they started the American Yiddish theater.
Well, thank you so much for your encouragement. I never have quite known exactly how this whole American Yiddish theater thing, which is very much about Yiddish culture, but also very much about America, how that would all play over here. But if you think it will, that is an encouragement for me to do so. I mean, one thing about them, about my family and their whole world, I know about them on my father's side back a few hundred years, and they were split always between the kind of sacred and profane experience of music. That a lot of them were chazans, they were cantors. And then a lot of them were kind of badchens, it's called. And a badchen is kind of like an entertainer who, at a wedding, for example, would get up on a chair and have a violin and kind of sing a song, which is the old traditional song, but with improvised lyrics, which make it particular to that occasion, or perhaps a new song that spins off of it. So this is kind of what they were doing. And that relationship of music to music, which is that it is an actual part of something that is in real life. It's for harvesting or planting or courting or mourning or whatever it is. There's a certain music that is appropriate to that, that somebody knows how to play in a way that it's the old song, it connects to the old tradition, yet it has something special which makes it this occasion now. That's really my tradition. What I really am is a kind of village musician with a good education. Really, that's as simple as that.
I'm very modest. Michael, that's all we've got time for. It's always fascinating to talk to you. The breadth of your musical experience is quite astonishing. I'd like to hear that too. So I'm sure everybody would like to join me in thanking you very much for your time. Michael Tilson Thomas.
Thank you, my great pleasure.